Hello, and welcome to the Marble Security Podcast. I'm Dave Jevons, the host of the program. Today, we're going to be talking about the 9 critical threats against mobile and remote workers. These are attacks and security vulnerabilities that are different from what you might face if you had a corporate provision PC running inside your own firewall. These are the types of things you need to be aware of when employees are using their own PCs or Macintoshes outside of your network, or if they're using Android or iPhone or iPad devices anywhere around the world. This is going to be a 9 series of podcasts. We're going to talk about the 9 different threats in detail in each podcast. The 9 threats briefly are malware, keyloggers, Wi-Fi hotspot compromises, DNS poisoning, malicious applications, jailbroken and rooted devices, unpatched operating systems, spear phishing, and advanced persistent threats. In today's episode, we're going to talk about number 1, malware, crimeware, and zero-day attacks against your employees who are using their own devices to access your corporate and your public cloud services. Interestingly, we think that antivirus products will protect our users from malware and crimeware and 0 days. It turns out it's really, it's an effective, it's about 80%. Depending on which kind of antivirus you're using, your daily detection rates and prevention rates range from about 80% down to as low as 20% for fairly major commercial antivirus products. They're important, but they are certainly not going to protect your users 100% from getting infected. This is, of course, because malware authors are cranking out new malware at an unprecedented rate. Most databases today have about 60 million malware samples in them, and the rate is increasing by about 10 to 20 million samples per year. This includes polymorphic malware, where basically every single person out there gets a different sample. We think of malware primarily on the Windows PC operating system, but there's certainly malware out there for the Android operating environment. In fact, there are more than 12,000 different pieces of malware that are out there, and that's growing at an ever-increasing rate. A lot of Android malware will install itself, basically rooting the device, taking it over, and then tracking data out of applications, monitoring network traffic, GPS information, even keystrokes, and sending it to third-party servers. In October 2012, the industry analyst group Gartner warned that employee-owned devices are going to get infected with malware at more than double the rate of corporate-controlled computers. One of the issues we're going to face as IT folks is if we've got employees out there using their own computers to access our networks or to access our cloud services, how do we know that they're really running up-to-date antivirus, anti-malware software? And how do we enforce it? For example, we might say that we don't want an employee coming into our own network if they're not running an updated AV profile that has scanned their computer for malware, because we don't want that stuff getting into our network and then taking over our network and stealing our corporate secrets. Well, we might be able to implement such a policy, but how do we, for example, implement it if we say, hey, you know what, we don't want them accessing our Salesforce.com database, our SAP, that may be hosted out in the cloud, any kind of cloud service. So that's really the interesting challenge that we're going to face here about how do we protect and enforce policies around malware prevention on employee devices. What we've done at Marble is realize that this is really a losing game. Despite the fact that most malware products, antivirus products, are less than 100% effective, we can't manage it. We've basically decided that certainly on the PC and the Mac environment, the right way to do it is to isolate the browsing and app environment from malware completely because we don't know what's on our own employees' personally owned computers. We can't enforce malware protection, and again, it's not 100% effective. So what we're doing is creating a virtualized operating system where they download the Marble app onto their PC or their Mac or their Android or their iPhone, and we create a virtualized operating environment which is effectively isolated from malware that may be resident on the native OS. So let's look at the Windows platform. When you download the app, it basically installs what is effectively a NSA hardened Linux environment in a virtual machine that fires up the browser, that connects through the VPN, that does authentication to the network, and lets the user go to, for example, salesforce.com or your private network through the VPN. And if there is malware on their computer, if they don't have up-to-date antivirus signatures, it really doesn't matter because you're running in a very isolated, virtualized environment. And that's, we believe, the only way to protect against malware, crimeware, and zero-day attacks on employee-owned devices that you don't control. And let's face it, we're doing that all the time. People are working from home, they're working on the airplane, they're bringing their own computers, they want a VPN in from anywhere, and the way to do it safely is in a virtualized, secure environment. Next week, we're going to talk about threat number 2, which is keystroke loggers. And we're going to talk about it not only as far as PCs go, but how they relate to advanced persistent threats, and more interestingly, the fact that it is possible to build a keystroke logger on both Android and iOS. I'm Dave Jevons. This is the Marble Security Podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks.